this video, I'm gonna show you guys how to cure your own corned beef, how to cook it perfectly, and then how to turn that beef into a really beautiful plate of corned beef and cabbage. And if you're the type of person that would never even consider a food project like corned beef, don't sweat it. The entire recipe and process here would totally work for store-bought corned beef as well. To get started, 5 to 7 days before I want to eat corned beef, I'll pour 1,000 grams of water into a saucepan, then 250 grams of salt, 100 grams of sugar, 15 grams of pink salt. This gives the brisket its distinctive red color and it gives it a touch of that tangy, cured meat flavor. The pink salt that I use is available on Amazon and I'll link to that down in the description. Or you could leave it out, but be warned, your meat will be gray. Next in goes 4 to 5 bay leaves, 15 grams of mustard seeds, 15 grams of coriander seed, 15 grams of whole black peppercorns, and then 5 to 6 smashed garlic cloves. By the way, if you don't want to track down all of these spices, try using some pickling spice. This is actually what a lot of traditional corned beef recipes call for, and I can confirm that it makes a flavorful brine. But for me, it's a little bit too allspice and clove flavored. Next, I'll move this pot over to my stove and bring it up to a ripping boil. I want to infuse this water with as much flavor as possible because I'm going to be diluting it in just a second. And after a quick 5-minute boil, I've got a garlicky, salty tea going on. So next, I'll pour this over 1,000 grams of ice to dilute it and cool it down. And if you're wondering, hey Bri, why are you using a wet brine here instead of a dry one? Well, I actually tested both wet and dry brines on the brisket to see which one was best. And to clarify, when I say wet brine, I mean using a solution of water and salt to cure the meat. Dry brining also cures the meat, but instead of dissolving the salt into liquid, it sits right on the surface of the meat. And after 7 days of curing, you can see how different the two methods are when they're side by side after cooking. The wet brine was quite a bit moister than the dry, and the salt level was what I would consider to be perfect. I mean, it's still salty, but in the way that corned beef should be. The dry brine brisket, on the other hand, was drier, the texture was tougher, and for me, it was way too salty. So I don't know why a lot of recipes call for dry brining your corned beef. In my experience, wet is 100% the way to go. And once I've got my brine cooled down, I'll grab my meat. Specifically, I'm using 5 to 6 pounds of brisket point. The point is the fattier side of the brisket, and I like it because it's unbelievably unctuous and succulent when cooked properly. Look at all this intramuscular fat. It looks almost like Wagyu. The less fatty, flat part of the brisket can definitely work for this recipe. It's just that it's less forgiving and, in my opinion, less delicious than the point. Next, I'll drop this beef brisket into my cooled down brine, then I'll move it over to my fridge to cure for 5 to 7 days. 5 days would be the minimum, and anywhere past 7, things would start to get salty. 5 days later, when I pull this wet brined beef out of my fridge, you can see that the meat has firmed up a lot and it has that classic reddish pink color. From here, I'll give this brisket a quick rinse under some water to remove excessive saltiness, then I'll dry it thoroughly with paper towel. This will save me from some dangerous oil splatter in just a second. Now, how do we cook this thing? Well, I trialed and blind tasted 3 different methods. One was braised, one was sous vide, and one was straight up boiled on the stovetop. The first test was braised.
Great texture. Soft, but not too soft.
Up next, I tasted sous vide.
This one's a little bit more texturally challenged. Gristly isn't the right word, but it's kind of dry.
Then finally, I tasted boiled brisket.
This one's good, but it has kind of a lunch meat texture. Like it's a little bit too bouncy for me. Overall, it's good, but probably my second favorite. I'd say 1, 3, 2. That's my ranking.
To review, that means that I liked the braised the most, I liked the boiled the second most, and the sous vide, surprisingly, was my least favorite.
That's like such good news. Now people can play along at home.
So to braise this corned beef, I'll grab a large, heavy bottom pot and drop it on the stove over medium-high heat. Once that's hot, I'll add in a long squiggle of high smoke point oil, then I'll drop in my rinsed corned beef. Since this meat is super firm and weirdly shaped, I'll need to press it into the pan for at least a minute to ensure proper contact. After 4 to 5 minutes, I can see that I've got some rendered fat and the surface is nicely golden brown, so I'll flip this over and sear it on the backside for another 4 to 5 minutes. And once I'm all seared up, I'll add in as much water as it takes to cover about 90% of this beef. Then I'll tuck in a sachet. What is that? Basically, it's a bundle of cheesecloth that I've added smashed garlic, a couple bay leaves, some coriander seeds, a shake of black peppercorns, and some mustard seeds too. Next, I'll bring the pot up to a boil real quick, then pop on a lid and slide it into a 275F oven to slowly braise for 5 to 7 hours. While that cooks, I'll thank Element for sponsoring this video. Element is an electrolyte drink mix created by a former research biochemist with enough sodium, potassium, and magnesium in it to help you feel and perform your best. best. I didn't know this until recently, but when you sweat, you lose water and electrolytes. So it makes perfect sense that you need to drink water and electrolytes to replace everything that you lost. With Element, I'm told that you get the optimal electrolyte ratios to help your body prevent muscle cramps, headaches, and energy dips, but also unlike other electrolyte drinks, you're not getting sugar, artificial colors, or other weird stuff that your body doesn't need. I'm kind of a gym head, you guys, and I also like to rip a sauna every now and then, so I'm sweating on the regular. When I do, I drink an Element pretty much every single time to replace all the salt and water that I sweated out. I also drink Element because it tastes good. It's by far the best tasting electrolyte drink that I've ever had, and I genuinely look forward to drinking it after a gym session. Right now, members of my community who want to try it can get a free 8-flavor sample pack with any order when you use my link, drinkelementi.com/Brian Lagerstrom. I'll leave the link in the description below if you want to give it a try. Thank you, Element. 6 hours later, I'll pull this beef out of the oven and check in on the texture to see if it's done.
So this is a very important part of this entire process. We have brined this corned beef for a week, and then we cooked it for 6 hours. So there's a lot of pressure. We don't want to overcook this and turn it to mush. We really have to make sure that we nail this cook. So texturally, what we're looking for here is the meat fibers to have a little bit of give, like this. I could tear it apart if I needed to, but the whole thing is still holding itself together. That's really important because it's going to allow us to slice this corned beef and keep it in one piece.
And once I've determined that the corned beef is tender but not too tender, I'll move it over to a baking dish, then ladle in a couple cups worth of cooking liquid to keep things moist. From here, I'll cover with foil, then move the whole thing to the oven to rest and stay warm at 200F for about 20 minutes while I cook my veggies. Next, I'll move my cooking liquid over to the stove and bring it up to a simmer, then grab the vegetables that I'm about to cook in it. The first of which is a giant carrot. This is also called a horse carrot, and there's nothing special about it other than it's huge and it's going to allow me to have wonderfully large chunks of carrots in my final dish. Now to prep these things, I like to cut them into a restaurant shape called an oblique. The move there is cutting on a diagonal to get an organic trapezoidal shape while rotating the carrot. I'll cut, then turn about 45 degrees, and then cut through my previous cut at the same diagonal angle. Oblique carrots look really pretty, but also cutting them this way allows me to get an irregular shaped vegetable broken down into pieces that are more or less the same size, and that means they'll cook more evenly. Next, I'll grab a small head of green cabbage and peel off the outer 8 or 9 leaves. I'm peeling this because the outer stuff is fibrous and not good to eat, but also this shrinks the size of the head and allows me to get more petite pieces that'll be easier to eat and cook more evenly. Once I've got a head of cabbage that's about 7 to 8 inches across, I'll cut off the stem end, then carefully cut it in half right through the core. Next, I'll cut each half head of cabbage into 5 pieces, making sure to cut through the core on each piece. This is important. The cabbage leaves will fall apart if there's no spine holding them together, and that'll make serving the cabbage messy and wet. This is what the ideal cabbage piece should look like. It's about 4 inches tall, 3 inches wide, and perfectly held together with a spine of tender cabbage core. Next up is potatoes. I've got about a dozen small red ones here, and I'll just cut those in half. I tried this recipe with both golds and russets, and I can't recommend them. They get mealy and they fall apart when they're boiled, plus their skin has the texture of wet paper when cooked in water. And once I've got all my veggies cut down into their appropriate sizes, I'll move them back over to the stove where my cooking liquid is back up to a simmer. In goes my cabbage, the potatoes, and then the carrots. I'll just jump in and get those fully submerged real quick, and then I'll turn the heat down to low and gently poach these veggies for about 15 minutes. Don't cook these at a full boil. Aim for just barely at a simmer or water that's about 200F. That's gonna give us the best texture. 15 minutes later, I'll pop the top off this pot, then snatch out a little red potato to see what the texture's doing. As you can see, the skin is softened and easily cut with a fork, and the inside is creamy and soft, but not mushy. I'll also check in to see if the carrots are looking tendy, and yeah, the spoon cuts right through it, so that passes the test. Now to pull this whole thing together, I'll grab my corned beef out of my low oven. At this point, it's fully rested and has reabsorbed some of the liquid that it lost during the cook. When I cut into this thing, you can see it looks absolutely sickening. The cook on this is perfection. The meat is tender and gelatinous, but it's still easy to get a clean slice. Of course, if you went with the leaner flat end of the brisket, your results will still be very juicy, but not like this. I feel like I need to blur this out because it's so explicit looking. To serve, I'll make neat piles of each vegetable on either side of my beef, then drizzle some cooking liquid on top to keep things looking shiny. Now, the last touch is to drizzle a little horseradish cream on top of the beef. To make it, I combined 125 grams of sour cream with 75 25 grams of mayo, 3 grams of salt, 15 grams of water, a dozen or so cranks of black pepper, and then 75 grams of prepared horseradish. To finish, I'll just give it a quick stir to combine, and there we go. Now we got a zippy condiment to cut through all that salty, fatty beef. You guys, this dish is so much more than just boiled meat and vegetables. The beef's texture and flavor hits just like Texas barbecue brisket, but without the smoke. It's luscious, it's buttery, it's rich, it's briny, it's tangy, and it's garlicky. Also, the veggies aren't a soggy afterthought.
Ooh, red potato. What is up?
They all have their own wonderful, distinctive texture, and I honestly look forward to biting all 3 of them. I urge you to make your own corned beef for St. Patty's Day this year. It's so easy and the results are so freaking dope. Again, I'll link to the pink salt that you need to make it in the description below if you need some. And if you want to see what else you can do with this homemade corned beef, then please check out my video for a Reuben sandwich. Now, let's eat this thing.